What if I told you the song Fresh Out the Slammer by Taylor Swift is not about Matty Healy, or any man for that matter? Of all the songs that are misunderstood on the Torture Poets Department album, the one that I think may be the most misunderstood is Fresh Out the Slammer. In fact, if I could have Taylor herself weigh in on any of my analysis of her songs, this would be the one I would love for her to confirm or deny, because it literally nags at me. By the way, this is part of my deep dive of Taylor Swift's album, The Torture Poets Department, where I talk about the meaning of the songs and why I think this album has some of her best songwriting to date. My perspective is one of a songwriter and a former English teacher. I think Fresh Out the Slammer is so misunderstood because the immediate conclusion that everyone came to was that Taylor is talking to a lover in this song, and that must be Matty Healy. And I think this happened for two reasons. One, some key lyrics have been misinterpreted. And two, the pop culture context within which we first heard this song was that people were still trying to figure out the situationship she had with Matty. So this led people to make quick assumptions about this song that were actually incorrect. Because when you think about it, for a song that's supposedly about finally being able to be with a long-awaited lover, isn't it curious that most of the song is actually talking about the ex and unpacking that relationship? For a song that's supposedly about reuniting with this former lover, isn't it odd that the tone of the song is actually kind of sad? Especially in the outro, which is the unique and intentional ending to the song, where she's supposedly running to this lover. Isn't it strange that there's no sense of giddiness or even eager anticipation, but rather the mood feels poignant and bittersweet? That's because I don't think Taylor's addressing a literal lover in this song. She's not talking about Matty Healy. She's talking to herself. I believe that Fresh Out the Slammer is actually Taylor's love song to herself. It's about her rediscovering and reclaiming the sense of self she had lost in her relationship with Joe Alwyn. And she wrote this song using the concept of addressing a lover, but she's actually talking to herself from a second-person perspective. The evidence is all in the writing, and this is one of my favorite songs to talk about. So if you're here for the deep dive, let's get into the lyrics and I'll explain. The song begins with the chorus, but we'll come back to that. First, I'm going to try to quickly go through verse 1 because it'll give us the context for the rest of the song. But the second half of the song is what we'll really focus on because that's where a lot of misinterpretations happen. So stay with me here. Verse 1 is straightforward. Taylor gives a recap of the state of the relationship with Joe when it ended. She first shows us with imagery, and then she tells us explicitly what she wants us to know. So in line 1, another summer taking cover, rolling thunder. She shows us stormy weather and how that's not a first for the relationship. Then in line 2, she tells us exactly what she wants us to know. He don't understand me. Pointing to the feelings of disconnect she had in the relationship, feelings that she's written about in many other songs. She does this show and tell again in line 3, splintered back in winter, silent dinners bitter. She shows us a fractured relationship. Then in line 4, she tells us exactly what she wants us to know. He was with her in dreams. And this means exactly what you think it means. The third-party female is a recurring character in the musical chronicle of this relationship going back albums. We can't get into that now because that rabbit hole is deep. But just know that Taylor is explicitly saying that the existence of another woman was a contributing factor in the demise of her relationship. She continues on, line 5, gray and blue in fights and tunnels. Here she's using a mixture of metaphorical and literal terms to refer to the relationship. Gray and blue are colors she associates with the relationship in its decline. She uses these two colors across a number of songs as a metaphor for the lifelessness and sadness she was experiencing. Fights and tunnels are literal. Why tunnels? I believe she's referring to the numerous fights they've had where one of them had picked up and left. We know this from songs on the Lover, Folklore, and Evermore albums where she's mentioned either of them riding off alone on a train after a fight. We know the London Metro train system runs right through the neighborhood where they lived in Primrose Hill, and of course that system is underground. In the song Cornelia Street, she actually explicitly says this, I packed my bags, left Cornelia Street before you even knew I was gone. But then you called, showed your hand. I turned around before I hit the tunnel. Because to leave New York City from the Lower West Side where Taylor lives, you would go through the Holland Tunnel. So here in line 5 with gray and blue in fights and tunnels, Taylor is telling us that the deterioration of the relationship was defined by feelings of depression and cycles of fighting. She continues in line 6, handcuffed to the spell I was under for just 1 hour of sunshine, meaning given what she had just told us what the relationship was like, she doesn't have a logical explanation for why she stayed for so long. It was as if she was imprisoned under a spell. And this metaphor of imprisonment is how she has continually referred to the relationship as it was breaking down. And for what? For just 1 hour of sunshine. for mere moments of temporary warmth and happiness. Line 8, years of labor, locks, and ceilings in the shade of how he was feeling. Taylor is telling us how she sees the relationship in hindsight, years of hard work and emotional confinement. In the shade of how he's feeling means Joe's feelings and state of mind cast a long shadow over Taylor and heavily influenced how she felt. She was a hostage to his feelings. And what she describes here in this line is exactly what she tells us in the song So Long London, which is track number 5 on the album, the track listing that Taylor has said to be the song that's the most personal and honest. In that song, Taylor refers to this very same relationship hard labor by saying, "My spine split from carrying us up the hill." She refers to this very same experience of being held emotionally hostage by saying, "My friend said it isn't right to be scared every day of a love affair. Every breath feels like rarest air when you're not sure if he wants to be there." Then here in Fresh Out the Slammer, she ends her reflection of the past here in verse 1 with the line, "But it's gonna be all right, I did my time." She will go on to repeat this line in the song, so we know this line is meaningful and important. By saying, "But it's gonna be all right, I did my time," what Taylor communicates implicitly is that a part of her may have felt unsure or even guilty about the decision to walk away from this relationship. Because the tone of what she's saying here comes across as self-reassurance. It's as if she's responding to an insinuation that the breakup was not the right choice. This interpretation is actually supported by what she says in So Long London when she writes, "And you say I abandoned the ship," meaning her ex accused her of giving up on the relationship. So imagine the guilt. It's hard enough to walk away from a 6.5-year relationship without having some doubts about whether it's the right decision, but especially so if the other person is saying, "You're just giving up on us." So here in Fresh Out the Slammer, Taylor ends verse 1 by asserting that I didn't just give up, I did my time. I tried long enough and hard enough to make this work. Now, I just think it's interesting that for a song that's supposedly about her reuniting with a long-awaited lover, she just spent the entire verse 1, the section that established the context for a song, talking about her ex. There's no mention of this supposed lover. I believe this was intentional on Taylor's part, and actually the first clue as to the true subject and meaning of the song. Taylor is purposefully orienting the first section of the song around her relationship with Joe and how that relationship affected her, because that is the context within which we are to digest the rest of the song. We're at verse 2, and this begins the second half of the song where most misinterpretations happen. Taylor starts verse 2 by showing us this scene. Camera flashes, welcome bashes. I love Taylor's ability to say so much with so little, because the invisible but implied characters here are her friends, who are taking the pictures and who are with her at the parties. This imagery is important, because what Taylor is telling us is that Fresh Out the Slammer, after the breakup, it was a celebration. The breakup was celebrated by her friends. This is incredibly revealing of how her friends felt about Taylor being with Joe, and it's consistent with what she's written in other songs, such as in So Long London when she talks about her friends saying it's not right the way she was feeling in this relationship. Line 2, get the matches, toss the ashes off the ledge. This could be a literal reference to the ceremonial burning of objects associated with a relationship after a breakup, but it's also a figurative way of saying destroy any remnants of this relationship and move on. As we know from the musical arc of this relationship that's been chronicled by Taylor across many albums, she and Joe were very much on and off. This is why in the song LML, yes, that song is about Joe, she writes, "Who's gonna stop us from waltzing back into rekindled flames if we know the steps anyway?" Meaning, what's gonna stop us from getting back together? We've done this so many times, it's become routine. She reiterates this by also saying, still alive, killing time at the cemetery, never quite buried. Meaning they were never quite over for good. So here in Fresh Out the Slammer, the line, get the matches, toss the ashes off the ledge, is Taylor saying, good riddance. She's done for good this time. Forget about trying to bury this relationship or it might still come back and haunt her. She's going to cremate this relationship and throw the ashes off a cliff so they never get back together again. We've actually seen the visual representation of this in the Eras Tour when she burns down the Lover House. Because remember, even though the Lover House is now more known for being a representation of Taylor's albums, it was originally and still is a representation of her relationship with Joe. So Taylor begins verse 2 here by establishing that the relationship with Joe is over, the breakup is seen as a positive, and she's vowing to never go back to that relationship again. Then she continues line 3. As I said in my letters, now that I know better, I will never lose my baby again. We'll find out what letters mean in a moment. But first we need to figure out who she's referring to when she says my baby. Here, the correct understanding of the writing and grammar is crucial to the correct interpretation. The first thing we need to keep in mind is that lines within the same stanza relate to one another. They're usually part of the same train of thought. So whatever is written here in lines 1 to 4 is one coherent thought. Then we need to understand that the phrase, as I said in my letters, is a prepositional phrase. So whatever comes after, as I said, is a repeating and a reiteration of what was just said before. This means the lyric, now that I know better, I will never lose my baby again, is Taylor repeating and reiterating what she just said in line 2. This translates to her saying, I will never go back to that relationship again. Like I said, I will never lose my baby again. Taylor is showing us a connection. She's saying, going back to the relationship with Joe would mean to lose my baby. You might be thinking, okay, but that still doesn't tell us who baby is. How do we know for sure that baby refers to someone other than Matty Healy? We know because of what Taylor says next. Line 5. My friends tried, but I wouldn't hear it. Watch me daily disappearing for just one glimpse of his smile. This is where I usually see a major misinterpretation happen. A lot of people have incorrectly interpreted this to be about Matty Healy, thinking that Taylor is saying she was disappearing to see him despite her friend's objections. That's incorrect, because the he in his smile is actually referring to Joe. How do we know this? Because Taylor's use of pronouns is consistent. In this song, she refers to the lover character in the second person. It's who she's talking to. We see it in the lyrics, pretty baby, I'm running back home to you. All those nights you kept me going, swirled you into all of my poems. And the character she refers to in the third person is Joe. That's who she's talking about. And we see this in the lyrics, he don't understand me. He was with her in dreams, in the shade of how he was feeling. Keeping pronouns consistent is one of the basics in songwriting. It helps avoid confusion and allows the audience to understand clearly who and what the writer is talking about. For a seasoned writer like Taylor, she wouldn't make the amateur mistake of mixing up her use of pronouns. The he in his smile is intentional and consistent with who she's been talking about in the third person, and that is Joe. So in line 6, when Taylor says, watch me daily disappearing for just one glimpse of his smile, she's saying, my friends watch me gradually lose myself in trying to make Joe happy. And this is the consistent narrative we've witnessed in other songs. It becomes clear then that the disappearing in line 6 and lose my baby in line 4 are referring to the same thing. Taylor is talking about losing her sense of self. That's what her friends tried to help her see in line 5, but she wouldn't hear it. That's why, now that she knows better, in line 4, she'll never let it happen again. That's why she had to end it for good and toss the ashes off the ledge in line 2 so she never goes back to that relationship. And that's why the breakup was celebrated in line 1 as her friends welcomed her back to her old self. Taylor is recalling to herself how she had lost her sense of identity in that relationship and declaring that she will never do that again. Knowing that Taylor is talking to and about herself in this song, we can see that mentions of my baby or pretty baby are just her being self-referential. She is the second person subject, the you in this song. And that's what we have to keep in mind when we interpret the lyrics, that she is writing using the concept of talking to a lover, but she's actually talking to herself. So when she says in the chorus, now pretty baby, I'm running back home to you, fresh out the slammer, I know who my first call will be too. What Taylor means is that she's running back home to herself. She's reclaiming the sense of self she had lost. Now that she's fresh out of the slammer, out of the confinements of this relationship, she's making herself a priority. In other words, she is actually talking to a former love, herself. We can also look at line 3 again and understand what she means with, as I said in my letters. What are letters you write to yourself? Diaries and journal entries. And we know Taylor is a dedicated journal writer. She's talked about how she's been journaling since she was a teenager and how it helps her process her emotions and whatever she's going through. So lines 3 and 4 tell us that these important realizations that Taylor came to have about herself and her relationship were processed and documented in her writing. And not just in her personal writings, but also in her songwriting. Because she goes on to say in line 8, all those nights you kept me going, swirled you into all of my poems. Meaning, when things were really hard, she kept herself going by channeling all her thoughts and feelings into her writing. As we know, Taylor is a prolific writer, and her journaling and songwriting are very much intertwined. In an interview years ago, Taylor had said, quote, "Journaling was what made me discover that I loved poetry, and poetry is so close to songwriting." So here in line 8, Taylor is saying that everything she went through that ultimately led her to rediscover and reclaim her sense of self, she swirled into all of her poems she wrote about in her songs. And we can see the evidence of this in the Torture Poets Department album, because this album is incredibly introspective. Even more so than being an album about love and heartbreak, I think this album is ultimately about self-identity. These songs are a window into how Taylor sees the world, how she thinks the world sees her, and how she sees herself. In a lot of ways, I think Taylor's relationship with Joe and the journey of writing the album was a coming of age for her. I think it was a monumental experience through which she learned profound lessons about herself, about life, and love. It marked the end of an era not just for her relationship, but also for herself, that perhaps she had outgrown old beliefs she had held about herself and what it means to love and be loved. This is why here in Fresh Out the Slammer, she ends verse 2 with the line, "Now we're at the starting line, I did my time." Meaning she is at a new beginning. She is emerging from the throes of this relationship and this era of her life, a new woman. And we can see this in the inspiration for the opening of the Eras Tour, where the representation of the birth of Venus, the goddess of love, is signifying a rebirth for Taylor. This brings us to the ending section, the outro of the song. I'll continue in part 3. This is the third and final part of my deep dive of the song Fresh Out the Slammer by Taylor Swift, from the perspective of a songwriter and a former English teacher. I'm explaining why I think this song is the most misunderstood song on the Torture Poets Department album, because the subject of the song is not Matty Healy or any man at all, but rather it's a love song from Taylor to herself, where she's writing using the concept of addressing a lover, but she's actually talking to herself from a second-person perspective. In part 1, we looked at verse 1 and learned the context for the song. In part 2, we looked at the lyrical evidence in verse 2 and the chorus. Now we're at the ending section of the song, the outro. For the outro, Taylor makes the deliberate choice of changing the tempo and slowing down, creating a distinct and a clear separation between the outro and the rest of the song. This tells me she's switching gears, and that whatever she's about to say may have to be approached differently from prior lyrics. The first 5 lines of the outro are fascinating to me because they can be interpreted in 2 different ways. One interpretation, and the most common approach, is seeing this stanza as a continuation of line 1, which would make it, "Pretty baby, I'm running to the house" in line 2 and "running to the one" in line 4. By the way, keep in mind what we learned in part 2 of this deep dive, that Taylor is actually talking to herself in this song, so lyrics like "Pretty baby" and "you" are references to herself. So in this interpretation, she's running to the house where she still waits up and running to the one who says she's the girl of his American dreams. In this instance, the one is actually referring to Matty Healy. Together, these lyrics paint a picture of Taylor running toward her future after Joe. The second way to interpret this stanza, and the way I personally see it, is that Taylor is actually saying goodbye to her old self and Joe. I say this for a few reasons. One, the way this outro is structured, line 1, "Now pretty baby, I'm running," is actually part of the old chorus. She kind of trails off with the word running, and the tempo change actually happens after this line. So line 2 is actually where the new section starts, distinguishing a new perspective or thought. The idea that Taylor is saying goodbye here is reinforced by the fact that the phrases "to the house" and "to the one" actually sound like farewell toasts. In a farewell toast, people would say something like, "To the house that raised my family, it was small, but it was full of love." Or, "To the job that started my career, I won't miss the hours, but it taught me everything I know." Usually, there's a mix of a sense of loss and nostalgia. Even when someone is moving on to something good or better, a farewell is in itself an occasion that is bittersweet. And that's what we see here in line 2 of the outro. Taylor is saying goodbye to the house where I still wait up and that porch light gleams. And you may remember this porch light imagery from the Folklore album. And also, remember in Solo London when she said, "I left all I knew, you left me at the house by the heath." Here in line 2, she's saying goodbye to the home they built together and the old version of herself that spent so much time waiting up for Joe. In line 4, she's saying goodbye to the one who says, "I'm the girl of his American dreams." In this interpretation, the one means Joe. And in the musical chronicle of her relationship with Joe, she's used this reference to America or this American persona since songs on the Lover album. So here in line 4, she's saying goodbye to the one who had once made her feel the most loved and wanted, who had once told her she was his favorite. There's a keen sense of sadness and nostalgia here. And if you watched my deep dive of So Long London, you may remember that this is the same mixture of emotions with which Taylor was saying goodbye to this relationship in that song. In the ending chorus of So Long London, she basically says, "Farewell, we had a good run. It was great while it was good, but I'm not the one." And here in the outro of Fresh Out the Slammer, we're seeing that same farewell with the same mixture of sadness and nostalgia. Whether you interpret this section as she's running toward or away from the house and the one, I think ultimately it doesn't actually matter because the sentiment is the same. Taylor is saying goodbye to a previous relationship, a previous life, and a previous self, and she is choosing to move on toward what awaits her next. And you know what? Given that Taylor is very good at creating double entendres and layers of meaning in her lyrics, maybe she intended for both interpretations. So I see images when I listen to music, and this section always makes me see a scene where someone's sitting in the back seat of a car that's driving away and they turn around for one last look. And this stanza is a moment where as they take everything in, they're filled with a sense of loss and nostalgia. Because in Taylor's case, she knows she's leaving behind so much more than just a house. She's leaving behind everything. The relationship she had invested years in, the person who she thought she was going to be with forever, the life they had built together, and the future they had once dreamed of. And in this moment, she makes the decisive choice to move on instead of going back. Line 6, "And no matter what I've done, it wouldn't matter anyway. Ain't no way I'm gonna screw up now that I know what's at stake." What's at stake is what she told us earlier in the song, the lesson that she learned through all of this. Line 3 in verse 2, "Now that I know better, I will never lose my baby again." So what's at stake is her losing her sense of self. She's saying here in line 6 to 9, "It doesn't matter what I would've, could've, should've done. None of that matters. I will never make the same mistake again of losing myself in a relationship, specifically this relationship." Because you can hear in the phrasing in the song that the word "here" in line 10 actually can be taken as a continuation of line 9, making it "now that I know what's at stake here." Here also does a double duty of pointing our attention to what she says next. In line 10, she sums up the relationship with this imagery. "At the park where we used to sit on children's swings wearing imaginary rings." Here, Taylor uses two recurring motifs found throughout her songs for describing her relationship with Joe in hindsight: being kids and playing pretend. In songs where she looks back at the height or the early stages of the relationship, she often does so with the perspective of how they were just kids. They were young and passionate, but perhaps also quite a bit naive and immature. In songs where she writes about the demise of the relationship, it's often with this sense of shattering realization that things were not what she thought they were, that what she thought was real was fake or counterfeit, what she thought was forever was just momentary. So here in line 10, Taylor is saying, "Look at us, we were just some kids, playing house, pretending it was the real thing." Then she ends this song with a single line of the refrain, "But it's gonna be alright, I did my time." She's telling herself that everything will be okay. I did all I could and gave all I had to this relationship. I will be okay. This is the mantra of the song. You can hear it in the way she sings this last line. It's as if she's reassuring herself. What she captures here is the complex emotion of feeling liberated from a toxic relationship, along with the shadow of a doubt about whether it was in fact the right decision, and the courage to believe that she'll be okay walking away from a relationship that's not right for her. Fresh Out the Slammer is not a song about Matty Healy. It's a love song from Taylor to herself. In a way, she does reunite with a former love. It's just not any man. It's herself. I think rediscovering and reclaiming her sense of identity led her to fully embrace who she is. After years of hiding and trying to make herself smaller to fit someone else's mold, I think Taylor learned to just embrace it, her career and stardom and all the good and bad that come with it, and also who she is, the person that may be too much for some people. I think this coming-of-age experience helped Taylor remember that she is in fact living the life she had dreamed about and worked so hard for. And instead of trying to live smaller and dream smaller, it reignited her creativity and ambition to dream even bigger. I see the Eras Tour and the Torture Poets Department album both as manifestations of that. Both were extremely ambitious projects where she pushed the boundaries on her own craft, creativity, and artistry. This is why the Lover House is a centerpiece in the Eras Tour. The ending of this relationship and the destruction of the Lover House is both the mourning of the end of an era and the celebration of a new one.